We'll be spending about the next 1 hour going through the journey of how do you deconstruct product. And I'll share how I typically think about doing this activity, how I've learned that particular skill over the last many years. And I'll share also along the way live course or a live case study of sorts so that it's a lot more interactive. It's relatable to a product that we use on a daily basis. And also then wrap it up with sort of good practices and rituals that you can incorporate into your everyday product life so that the act of deconstructing products over a period of time starts compounding so that you can build good products. So, Arish, should we probably get started? Awesome. So, topic for the day, how do you build products through deconstruction? Before we go deeper into the act of deconstruction, I felt it was important that we first unpack and align ourselves on a few definitions so that we're all on the same page, right? Each of these words could mean different things to each of you. And therefore, in order to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, I thought it's best to start with definitions, right? But even before that, a little bit of a fun question I thought I can ask you. What product do you think is being deconstructed here in the image? The answer is kind of fairly obvious, but I thought anyway I'll just ask. All right. I see a few people have answered it rather accurately. It is the Sony Walkman. Just to give a little of backstory, this particular product has been perhaps one of the most impactful products in my life, and one of the reasons why I fell in love with building products and want to be in the product management space in itself. Though at that point of time, I genuinely did not know that existed even a field called product management. My love for wanting to build great products started with being exposed to the Walkman, right? The notion of having the ability to carry songs anywhere you want, listen to it anytime was just too magical. So this was one of the most impactful events in my life, which made me want to consider uh, getting into the craft of building great products. So that's also the reason why this picture is there. Now, let's move on into definitions. Let's start by asking the question, what do we mean by product sense? There's already a couple of folks here who've probably been in the world of products, been building for the last couple of years, I feel, according to the poll. So maybe a few of you can take a stab at giving me a crisp definition of what you think product sense means. We'll take probably about 30 seconds for this. So feel free to use the chat to write in what you think is a definition according to you. Hey, I see a few folks also saying that the audio is not clear. Let me know in case, and I will probably take off my headphones and try something else. Awesome. So very interesting definitions. A few folks were probably hitting it in a rather interesting direction as well. So let's start by deconstructing it, right? With what we know is common definition. So when we talk building a product, right, to define any product as, an object that goes about fulfilling a user's need or desire, thereby delivering value. Now, there are many types of products in itself. There are products which do not per se have a commercial angle. Take, for example, Wikipedia. That's one such product where, there's no commercial angle involved to it. And there are commercial products then like, say a Facebook or an Uber, right? So when you add in that layer of commercial product, the way I'd like to differentiate is say that, a commercial product should also be able to capture some part of the economic value back for the business and therefore the shareholders of the organization, right? So ultimately, great products help in delivering value that fulfill a user's need or desire. And a commercial product, therefore, should also aim at capturing some of that economic value back for the business and shareholders as well. Moving on. In the case of tech products specifically, right, and I'm going to specifically only focus on building tech products, there are a lot more nuances, say, when it comes to other kinds of products. Say, for example, even CPG products, like, say, your shampoo or your razor blade are also products. But for the scope of this discussion, we're only going to focus on tech products. Now, a lot of you would have already seen this Venn diagram of sorts, right? This is like the most popular definition that is used. And I thought I'll start with something familiar to build up upon the case of how do you think about product sense, right? So when we talk about value delivery in the case of building tech products, our goal as product organizations, and I mean not just product managers, but the design team, the engineering team, and the entire unit of product coming together is largely to understand users' aspirations and abilities and disabilities, businesses' aspirations, abilities, and disabilities, technology's aspirations and disabilities, to identify what is valuable, which can deliver value to the user, and therefore, in the case of commercial products, also capture value back. Again, the reason why I'm starting with these definitions is also seeing a lot of early folks getting into the world of product management, aspiring to be product managers early in the APM career as well. So I thought it's good to start with some of these base definitions before we build deeper. So let's then try to unpack the word sense. Now I'm trying to use, again, the most commonly accepted definition according to a dictionary, which is to say, when you have sense about something, it's to mean you have awareness and understanding about a particular topic or about a particular concept. So when we then combine these two things, it says that, when we talk about product sense, it's about building awareness and understanding about each of these nuances: the user's aspirations, abilities, and disabilities, a business's aspirations, abilities, and disabilities, technology's aspirations, abilities. Unless you have awareness and understanding, it is going to be difficult for an individual to build product sense, right? So the way I'd like to therefore define what it is to have good product sense is the ability to make timely decisions that consistently deliver value to both the end users and business by having a deep sense of awareness and understanding about users, business, technologies, aspirations, abilities, and disabilities. The reason why I'm starting out a very unpacked version is so that we can use this definition to simplify it as we go along this journey as well. The question then I'd like to ask for ourselves then is, if this is good product sense, then what is great product sense, right? So we've seen that there's a set of definitions. We've talked about timely decisions. We've talked about delivering value. We've talked about understanding. How do you then move from good to great? And the way I'd like to answer it by saying, in order for you to have great products, it is to deal with ambiguity. Reason being, many times when you build a product, you're always not going to have all the most detailed understanding about a user's aspirations and abilities. Where is the market trending towards? What is going to be truly possible by a piece of technology? What kind of complications or challenges a business may face going forward into the future? So there's always a wide range of ambiguity that you start seeing as you start going up your career chain, right? So early on in an APM's world, the degree of ambiguity is rather limited. You have a very small feature to focus on. The scope is very clear. You don't have too many moving pieces. But as you start going up your product career, let's say you start becoming a director of product or senior director of product or a chief product officer, there are more unknown unknowns than known knowns. And in that case, you do not have the time, nor will you always have the resources to go about doing the most detailed exploratory studies, research, analysis, analytics to understand each of these nuances in great detail to make decisions with great degree of conviction and confidence. And therefore, the ability to make great decisions, which still consistently allows you to deliver value time and again, is where I differentiate the path from being good to great. And how you build upon building good to great is also what I'm going to talk about as we grow across in this conversation. So again, to quickly do a quick recap, uh, the layer of difference that I add to good versus great is how do you make these timely decisions that deliver value, even when faced with incredible ambiguity. So simplifying this takeaway is great product sense is the ability to consistently make value delivering timely product decisions, even when faced with major ambiguity. Reason being, ultimately, you have a ton of information, you have all the understanding, you have all the awareness, but you still have to make a choice. Which user needs matter the most? Which business needs matter the most? What kind of technology choices do we make? What are the limitations? Ultimately, each of this is a decision, and you'll see the nuances of this decision as we do our live course as well, right? So, recapping, great product sense is consistency, value delivering in a timely manner, making those great product decisions, even in the face of incredible ambiguity.
If you look at Amazon's core leadership principle as well, right? One of the defining characteristics of great leaders at Amazon is they are right a lot. They have the ability to take strong judgments based on instincts. Now, these instincts aren't gut shots in the sense that one fine day someone wakes up and says, hey, I have this great idea. No, it happens because someone has been consistently observing behaviors, observing businesses, observing technology trends over multiple years to know which signals matter, which of those signals are the most important, relevant, basis which you can take a very high confidence bet on what kind of business choices to make, what products to build, what markets to go after, what kind of customers to focus on, what kind of marketing could work, and where is the general trajectory of technology to build these high confidence bets, right? And therefore, it becomes really, really important for product leaders, aspiring product leaders as well, to build this good judgment. And that's what we call as building great product sense. Knowing which of those product decisions can consistently deliver value time and again to the users as well as end business owners, right? Right. Now, we're coming into the juicy part of the discussion. How do you go about building product sense, right? So I'm going to use this little bit of a flow diagram of sorts to help you understand how do you structurally decompose the notion of building product sense, right? We talked about product sense as having awareness and understanding, right? I'm going to translate it again, probably common word parlances that you've heard from other product leaders, other product blogs, etc. So when we talk about awareness and understanding from the lens of user, we call this as empathy, the ability to put ourselves in the shoes of our end users and customers, to feel what they feel, to see what they can do and cannot do, and see what kind of aspirations they have, and then use all of those insights to then figure out which of those really matter to make the kind of product decisions that we want to make. Likewise, when we talk about awareness in the lens of business, we translate this in common parlance as domain knowledge. For example, if you're working in retail industry, there are certain nuts and bolts in terms of how this industry works, in terms of, say, cost structure, in terms of how supply chain works, in terms of the first principles of what customers are looking for, in terms of who are the various players operating, right? We call this as domain knowledge of business. Likewise, when it comes to technology, we call this as technology understanding, in terms of saying, hey, how does this piece of technology work? What are the first principles behind it? What are the technology trends powering it? Where is this piece of technology going to land up 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Now, you may not be necessarily able to exactly predict when it'll happen, but you should have a high degree of conviction of what is possible over the next couple of years, and therefore use those insights to also make meaningful product solutions, right? You combine all of this, your empathy, your domain understanding, your technical know-how of how to build products, to therefore then come up with creative solutions, right? You then translate that to execution, which then finally goes on to delivering value. Now, in the realm of product sense, what we're going to focus on is these four elements, right? The ability to have empathy, domain knowledge, technical knowledge, as well as coming up with creative solutions. These four are your building blocks of product sense, right? There is also an element of execution, which I'll touch upon, which amplifies the rate of building product sense. I'll try to visualize that in the next step. So when we talk about building each of these components, empathy, domain knowledge, technical knowledge, creative solutioning, right? Execution. I've listed down a variety of techniques that you can use for building each of this. For example, when it comes to building empathy, there are a couple of methods. One, being a power user of a product. When you become one of the most obsessive users of a product, you kind of literally can see how a product works, flows, and also breaks. And you can then start identifying where and why things work and things don't work. So I think a few folks, personally me, when I build products as well, I try to entrench myself and make myself the most addictive, most obsessed person about building that product. You literally immerse yourself in saying that, if let's say I want to build a platform for fashion shopping, unless I'm someone who literally lives, breathes, thinks fashion, shops obsessively about fashion, talks about fashion, I will never be able to feel what it feels like to use that product and identify gaps in that product, right? I could hear a couple of things, but it never equals to you seeing the gaps, because one of the advantages that you have when you're a power user is you also have domain knowledge, you also have technical knowledge, and by virtue of having these two lenses attached, you can think about creative ways in which you can solve problems more effectively than if you would ask your customer, hey, how do I solve that problem, right? In the event that you cannot be a power user, you can also practice the art of observing users deeply. Now, what this means is not per se sitting and just only having, say, conversations with users and saying, hey, how do you use my product? What's going on? It is to actually live alongside them. The way I'd like to define it is, you be a fly on a wall. You try to embed yourselves into people's lifestyle. For example, if you're building products for tier 2 India, right? It's almost going to be impossible to try to understand how do people use product, what goes on in their lives, what are the kind of challenges and disabilities they have in their universe, sitting in a very comfy AC office in Bangalore. It necessitates for you to actually go down to some rural part of India, live alongside them, see what it feels like use their devices. If you're using, let's say, a premium iPhone and trying to build for Bharat, won't work. You probably need to go get yourself a Oppo phone for 6,000 rupees. You probably need to use the 3G connection that they're used to. You probably need to hang out in the circles of people they hang out to see, what are they talking about? How do they use the product? What other products are they using? When do they choose to use those products? What kind of experiences do they feel when they use it? What kind of body reactions are they giving? A lot of insights typically come from non-verbal cues as well, right? So most of us as product managers or user researchers typically look for verbal communications clues, but there's a ton of information that comes in when you observe non-verbal cues as well, right? The other means of also building empathy is, reading reviews that come in for your product, reading your CS tickets. I'll come to the last part, deconstruct products, in a bit, right? Likewise, when it comes to building domain knowledge, you could speak to folks who have been in that industry and operating. It's important to note there can be biases that come in when you speak to these industry leaders as well. But there's also a lot of meaningful signals. For example, if you really want to understand the first principles of how, say, the hoteling industry works, you could try to do a couple of experiments yourself, or you could speak to someone who's been in the hoteling industry for a couple of years to understand, hey, how do they think about it, right? And it's not to say you take all of those nuances, you can make a note of it and ask which of those nuances you don't agree to in today's context. And that's probably where opportunities start coming in. For example, if you were to speak to, say, someone from the hoteling industry in 2009, and they would say, for people who travel, always want a very standardized experience because they want to know that trust is universal, right? If I go to Japan, I go to US, I go to India, it's the same standard experience. So I don't have to fear that the experience is going to be broken, because the last thing I want is to be in a foreign land and have negative experiences in stay, food, etc. So I want consistency. So they pivot on the notion of consistency to build trust and experiences. However, when you're uh, trying to take a contrarian stand, you may say, hey, but as a traveler, I believe that I want to have the most local experience. And that's what gave birth to the concept of Airbnb. People did not want that consistency, right? So as much as it's important to speak to subject matter experts in industries, there are certain holy grails which don't have to be reinvented, but there could be certain ideologies that you could re-question in itself, right? I see that someone has asked me, how do you identify non-verbal clues? When we talk about non-verbal clues, we're looking at largely body language, right? What are the kind of facial expressions someone is giving, right? Look at their eyes. The eyes are usually very expressive for most people. And it doesn't mean you look at someone in a very creepy fashion. It means to take a step back and see, are they smiling? Are they looking frustrated? There's a lot of cues that the face gives, right? So that's what I technically mean by looking at non-verbal cues. It's looking at body language. It's looking at how the eyes move. It's looking at how people look at your product. It looks at how your hand moves over a screen in itself. Let's say you're building a digital product. How do people flick through your product? Are people rapidly flicking through, or are they casually flicking through? Are they taking the time to look at a screen? Each of these are signals to understand how a person thinks about using a product, right? It takes a lot of time, but over a period of time, you'll be able to understand and build cues on what each of these body languages mean, right? Now, coming back to domain knowledge as well, there are a lot of active communities. For example, if you want to build products for, say, chartered accountants, and understand how do you build meaningful workflows which help in solving a CA's life more effectively. You could go to speak to one CA, or you could try to embed yourself in a community of CAs and see what are the kind of conversations that are happening. Some of the best products that you have probably seen, such as, say, Dropbox, etc., originated by the founder being deeply embedded into certain communities where people are actively discussing and sharing challenges. Freshdesk is one such example where Girish, I think if I'm not wrong, joined into communities around Salesforce, which were not the official forums, but informal forums, where people were ranting about how difficult it was, how expensive it was. And you get a lot of then insights about what works in building those products, as well as what are the gaps in the industry which someone does not choose to solve for, and therefore opportunities for you to capitalize on as well, right? Likewise, when it comes to technical knowledge, you could speak to subject matter experts. For example, if you want to understand how search works today, by virtue of us being on platforms such as LinkedIn, you can actually go and see who are engineers at, say, Google, or who are engineers at Facebook, or who are engineers at, say, LinkedIn, who build such technical products. And today, a lot of folks are very open to sharing their knowledge as well. You could actually reach out to them and ask them, hey, how does search work? I have this doubt. Now, maybe if you reach out to 10 people, maybe one of two of them will choose to respond. The other is obviously asking for connections to say, hey, I'm looking for a subject matter expertise when it comes to search. Who in my network can connect me to a subject matter expert when it comes to search? Likewise, with the advent of internet, there is a ton of beautiful white papers put out there in terms of understanding how technical products work. So, for example, there is this website called ARXIV. You can make a note of it, right? Which has a compendium of some of the most detailed white papers written by PhDs, by engineers, by scientists on various topics. For example, if you want to understand how, let's say, generative AI is used for detecting fraud, right? LinkedIn in recent times has published a white paper around how to identify fraud in that aspect, right? You can go into the nuances of it, right? Likewise, if you check out, say, Meta's technical blog, or you can check out Stripe's engineering blog, a lot of these folks usually spend an inordinate amount of time writing very detailed articles about their technical infrastructure. So you don't have to feel that, hey, this information is not available. If you know the right places, you can actually go about finding these papers, immerse yourself into those topics that are relevant to the kind of products that you're building, and start reading it. And as you read, there are going to be things that you may understand, and there are things you may not understand. That which you do not understand, you can always go back to people in your circle and ask, hey, who is the best person who can go about helping me understand these nuances? Especially if you're working in the role of a product manager already, especially let's say you're a senior PM, you can always ask your engineering counterpart. I think every engineering leader and a counterpart would love to see product managers who go up to them and ask, hey, how does this piece of technical infrastructure work? Because they also want someone who understands their language. And the more you show that you care about their world, they will be more than interested to take you into very, very deep dives on how the infrastructure works. What are the kind of choices that are being made? How does, let's say, Google's search works, or how does image search work, etc. Right? So make sure that you invest your time into leveraging all of these open source material available and use it in conjunction with SMEs to understand that which you do not know. Now, coming to the fourth component, which is creative solutions. Now, this is a very interesting as well as elusive topic, wherein someone asks, how do I be creative? There's this notion that some people are born creative. I'd like to dispel that myth, because if I was to look back at my career, I was definitely not the most creative person on the planet, right? It's something that I've learned over a period of time by looking at great masters. So technique number one, if you really want to amp up your creative skills, look at who you think are creative personalities, right? Like, for example, Steve Jobs, or if you say the folks at Pixar make amazingly creative movies, like, try to read up about them, try to read blogs written by them to understand what are the thinking processes that they put behind being creative. Nothing better than actually seeking mentorship and working alongside with them, because I believe building products is a craft, and to learn great craft, sometimes it's best to shadow people who are already incredibly good at being creative. So if you're early in your career and you think there are some incredibly smart people, rather than optimizing for titles, salary, pay, etc., throw all of that aside, go join who you think is a great master and do whatever it takes to work under them for a couple of years so that you can freely learn everything that is from them, and then go out and try to optimize yourself for titles, designations, roles, salary, etc. It's not to say they aren't important, but I'm trying to say optimize for learning mastery first. Once you achieve mastery, it's going to be a lot more effective in putting that skill to capitalize on that knowledge as well. The second is learning the art of asking the right questions. And a precursor to that is, first of all, learning to ask questions, right? If you don't ask questions, you will not know what is a good question versus a bad question, right? Over a period of time, you will start realizing the value of implementing those questions and seeing whether those questions are taking you in the right direction or the wrong direction. So learning to ask the right questions coupled with good execution allows you to fine-tune the art of asking right questions. The third and probably the most powerful technique that I particularly love is putting in artificial constraints. Some of the best products that we have ever built or that have ever come into the world have happened because of constraints, not because of abundance, right? You take Twitter. Twitter is a product of constraint. Someone had the limitation saying, I'm going to put in the constraints of SMS moving to the digital world, and SMSs are limited to 143 characters. And therefore, that forces me to ask myself, how do I communicate more effectively? Airbnb came in because there was a shortage of hotels. If you had, let's say, abundance of money, you would probably say the answer to a shortage of hotels is building more hotels. But the fact that someone did not have money made them ask themselves, hey, I'm supply constrained. There is more demand than supply. I most definitely do not have the money to go out and build a chain of hotels. How do I creatively solve for this solution, right? So when you put in, therefore, artificial constraints in terms of building products, limit yourself in terms of time, limiting yourself in terms of people, limiting yourself in terms of money, you will be forced to ask the hard questions of, okay, given these constraints, how do we still go about solving those? And it's in those kind of constraints that you find some incredibly powerful solution. And in fact, some of the most life-changing products, not just commercial products, have come in as a consequence. A while back, I was reading about the story of how there was, I think, a medical research laboratory which is trying to figure out how do we make water portable in countries where there's very limited access to clear water. And one way could have been to say, let's fund this with hundreds and millions of dollars. But the approach they said was, I'm going to cut down budget to $1 million, 1/100th what we require, and force the team to say, you need to come up with a solution in 18 months. It really racked the team, and therefore they were able to come up with a portable solution which allowed us to say, anywhere in the world, no matter what source of water, we're going to filter it of all impurities and bacteria. And they were able to develop that product at incredibly cheap prices. So when you put in these kind of hard constraints, it forces you to think really hard on what kind of creative solutions can come about. Now, the next technique that I also personally love is seeking inspiration from outside, which is to say, or rather, which is to paraphrase Steve Jobs, say, good artists copy, great artists steal. And when you steal, you're not copy pasting ideas, you're taking the best of ideas and applying it in a new context. For example, when Ford came up with the concept of, a kind of a process where cars could be assembled hyper fast and have very low cost and overheads, the idea of it did not come by looking at other car manufacturing companies. It actually came out of looking at a meat picking company. How did a meat manufacturing company have a very high throughput system with very low wastage and very low overhead costs? They said, hey, can this methodology be brought into the world of car manufacturing so that we can make one car and only one car, but it increases the volume of cars that we make, it reduces the cost involved in making cars, and it also allows us to make minor tubes super fast. So sometimes the best answers for identifying creative ways of solving problems can come from not looking within your industry, but from outside your industry as well. And lastly, if you couple it with execution, all of these things allow you to fast track the pace at which, in the context of your industry, you know what works best and what doesn't work best. Now, coming to the last and one of the best techniques, as you can see, deconstructing products hits on multiple levels. It hits on helping build empathy. It hits on building technical knowledge. It also helps you understanding creative solutions, which is I see it as one of the most effective ways of building product sense, and which is why it's one of the most favored approach. Because most of the other approaches, if you can see, are piecemeal. It attacks only one component at a time. But deconstructing products hits on empathy, technical knowledge, and creative solution in one go. So it allows you to learn many of these nuances in one effective package. And that's what we're going to focus on. But before that, I think there is a particular trait as well that is supremely important. And that trait is curiosity. None of this is possible if you're not fundamentally curious. If you're not curious, you're not going to bother going and speaking to an SME. If you're not curious, you're not going to take the effort to go join a community. If you're not curious, you will not have the passion to wanting to pick up a product, deconstruct it, and learn it. So you need to build that innate curiosity, say, how do products work? Why does it work the way it does? Why is it so magical? Why are some products so terrible to use? Unless you get into that obsessive need to be curious and understand the way products work, everything that I said before is just going to fall flat. So the skill or the desire to be curious is something that you need to mentally train yourself to get to. Otherwise, all of this is just flat whitewash, right? Moving on. So my journey to product deconstruction started a lot before actually starting building products. So very, very early on, I chanced upon a book called How Stuff Works, which sparked my curiosity about the world around me. So I was curious, like, hey, how do CD burners work? Or how does an elevator work? Or how does my mixie at home work? Right? When you start being curious about every small thing around you, you then ask the right questions. And over a period of time, you start building that habit, right? It then becomes obsessive to a point where I started to become competitive about it. And thankfully, back in the day at IIT Madras, there used to be a quiz competition called How Things Work. And this would be probably what I spent most of my days at engineering college about, to say, okay, every year there's this annual competition called How Things Work, and I want to ensure that I'm going to be the winner for it. So I would be sitting obsessively and trying to read about every new piece of technology that came out. I would ask them to spend time from industry to come and explain to me how certain products work if I did not understand. And that allowed me over a period of time to ask the right questions, start seeing patterns, and that actually acted as a precursor for me to moving into product management a lot more effectively, because I started to learn the art of questions. It's not to say that there were many things I got right. In fact, there were a lot more unknowns that I only started to get right as I started building products in Excel. So it's not enough to just be curious. You need to couple it also with the art and craft of building products so that you can fine tune the difference between theory and practice. Now, let's get into the meat of it, which is how are we going to go deconstruct products? Typically, the way we go about deconstructing products, right? If you recall, there are three essential pillars: users, business, and technology. And these are a set of standard opening questions. You can take a screenshot if you'd like so that you can use it going forward when you want to go about deconstructing products. But these are probably the most important opening set of questions. There are many more questions, as you see, we will start asking as we start deconstructing. But when it comes to users, perhaps when it comes to building products, the most important question is, who are you building this product for? And I have a slightly different take on how to answer this question, which I'll come to when we're doing the live deconstruction. The second question that I try to ask myself is, what is the job that we're trying to do for the user? So many of you would have heard of this framework called jobs to be done, wherein we say customers or users hire a product to get a job done. So people aren't buying that product. They're trying to achieve a goal. For example, I hire an Uber to get me from point A to point B. But that's not the only job. I'd like to probably travel in style. I probably want to travel fast. I probably want to travel safely. So all of these are also sub-jobs to be done. So the Uber job is getting from point A to point B. But how that job can be fulfilled is a function of what my needs, desires, abilities, and disabilities are. So it becomes important that anytime you pick a product, you ask these two questions first. The third and most important question thereafter that follows is, what is the atomic unit of this solution or this product? I'll come to what that specifically means. The fourth is, how do users go about discovering this solution? How do users go about re-entering into this journey? And therefore, can you build a high-level customer map of this journey to see how do you go about fulfilling this job to be done? And from a user lens, how do we know we have actually done a good job of building this product? And lastly, what were some of the usability choices and design choices that were made? When it comes to business, the key set of questions that we typically ask are, who are the stakeholders? Because it's not the end user that we're only solving for. You sometimes may have government regulators. Sometimes you may have a vendor who you're also solving for. Sometimes you may have a legal party within your organization who may put in some rules saying, hey, this is not legally allowed in this country, and therefore you may want to consider this as well, right? Sometimes you may be building it for internal teams who may have certain constraints. For example, your marketing teams, your operations teams. So you're not only building for your user, you have a wide range of internal personas, external personas who you want to factor in. And it's at the intersection of all of these users that you may want to find out the ideal solution. Second, what is the business goal? So while the user's goal is to deliver value, there is also a business goal. It could be LTV, it could be retention, it could be word of mouth, it could be brand building. It's important to articulate and know how that goal is valuable to us, and how do you tie, therefore, the user goal to the business goal. Then the question boils down to, how would we know whether you have impact on the short term and long term? Ultimately, the goal of any commercial business is to create long-term impact. And for the users, it means that people keep coming back to your product over and over again. And from a business standpoint, it means that you're profitable, your revenues are growing. The investors who put in money into the organization are also able to make reasonable returns. Otherwise, in the absence of their capital, your business is also not going to fly forward, right? So it's important to understand short-term and long-term implications. Lastly, you may also want to look at how is this problem being solved. So I use the word competition in a very loose and frivolous way, not to per se say who's your immediate competitor, but who are all, or what are all the ways in which this problem is being solved for, and therefore what can you do way more effectively to solve for this. The third piece of this is technology, which is to ask ourselves, how does this system really work? What are the building blocks of it? What are the rules of this? What are its limitations? How does it work at scale? Are these working with other components to make this magic happen? And lastly, while we typically talk about functional requirements in terms of I should allow a user to do A and B, there are also non-functional requirements which define the magical experience. For example, when you search on Google and a result comes up, should the result turn up in under 250 milliseconds, or should it take 2 seconds? Greatly defines how a customer perceives experience. Many of you perhaps may have seen that documentary of how Spotify got built. It's available on Netflix. But the founders obsessive about the sound being played back after clicking play in under 100 milliseconds. Because he says that, that's what the internet stands for, real-time playback. If it were to take 2 seconds, the magic is lost. It would mean that I'm trying to figure things out. The only way to distinguish ourselves to being an internet music player is if the sound plays in 100 milliseconds. And there's a tangible effect. Customers engage with your music a lot more. People are going to talk about the magic. People are going to come back and use your product, etc. So there is a real world business implications for talking about what I call as non-functional requirements, which quantify the magic that goes into building your products. Now, I've talked about a lot of these questions. Let's try to actually put this to actual use to do a live deconstruction. So for the case of this discussion, we're going to talk about LinkedIn newsfeed. The reason we're particularly going to do it is I think a lot of folks also discovered this particular course and this discussion through LinkedIn. And I think a lot of you are active on LinkedIn as well. So I thought, why not as well use that product? I'm also particular about taking a product that I have not built so that you don't feel that there's a bias that I'm bringing to the table. Otherwise, you'd say, hey, Deepak, you built this product, therefore you know everything about it. No, I have not built any product at LinkedIn, so I have absolutely no clue. And I actually did this exercise last night. So I'm coming with a very fresh pair of eyes as to how I would have done this deconstruction, right? And going along in a very interactive fashion. So for the next maybe 30 to 40 minutes, I want you to actively participate. I'm actually now going to bring up the meeting chat in my view as well. So a couple of questions that you folks have asked, such as, what is an atomic unit, etc., is also going to come during the course of this discussion, right? So first and foremost, let's ask this question. Who is the user of this feature? So I'm going to take about 30 seconds, only again, in the interest of making sure that we spend time going through this entire discussion and not miss out on any of the juicy parts. Who is the user of this feature? So I see some interesting answers. I see working professionals, recruiters, jobs, sales folks, etc. Awesome, cool. Let's take a pause there, right? Now, I'm going to share a approach that I take, which is slightly contrarian to how most people answer this question, right? Typically, when we go about building products, when you're at least inside a company, you have a lot of context about your users. You've done a ton of research. So it helps to go down the path of doing your usual personas, which is, hey, meet Deepak. He's, 30 to 40 years old, a senior person in an organization, product person, probably aspirational to, build a startup, etc. This is good. But when you're looking at it from the outside, right, you're probably at best doing a lot of theorizing and what I call as fantasization. You probably don't have the time to sit and connect to enough people to build what I call as a meaningful user persona. So at least when you're doing deconstructs, it's not to say don't do user personas. That's not what I am professing. When you're inside an organization, please do it. But when you're doing a deconstruction, you don't have the time to build meaningful enough personas. So I try to take a step back and say, hey, can I try to reverse engineer the type of personas by just looking at the behaviors that this product has asked me to do, right? Therefore, I look and say, okay, who are the people actively putting content out there into this field? I'm just going to keep that as my spectrum. I'm not going to sit and think about who is LinkedIn trying to go after, what is the larger vision, etc., because that becomes a very theoretical exercise. And like I said, you don't have the time to sit and speak to a very large population to build that conviction. So rather, I say, hey, let's look at the behaviors this product is asking me to emanate, and therefore reverse engineer who are the potential type of people on this news feed. The first and obvious is probably the feed consumer, and this is everyone, right? It could be a graduate, it could be a sales professional, it could be someone who's looking for a job, it could be someone who is 10 years into their career. It really doesn't matter. But ultimately, you are someone who is on that news feed to consume information, right? So you're a consumer of information. Then there is the person who's actively creating content. And there are probably then three types of content creators, right? There is the individual user who is creating content. There is the business who's trying to create content. And then there are groups as well, which are also trying to create content. All of this amalgamates together to create your final newsfeed structure. And I'm not going to go into the details of what are the various types of business, etc., because again, it goes into too much of theorization at this point of time. And I don't have the time, and neither would you, to go to do such detailed exercises. So you may only then end up coming up with fantasy like, I'm a small startup, etc. For the case of this exercise, don't have to go into so much of unnecessary detailing to do good deconstructions, right? Because there are far more important questions that you need to actually answer when you talk about a good deconstruct. Now, the second question, if you recall, that we had in our deck was to ask, what is the job to be done for each of these types of users, right? So now again, I'm going to use the jobs to be done framework to answer this. So as a feed consumer, what is it that I'm trying to achieve? I would like to consume and engage with content from people and business that I'm connected to, follow, or likely to get value from, so that I can be smarter or professionally get new opportunities. Ultimately, why are we there on LinkedIn? Either we want to be smarter about the work that we do, that's why we consume that content, or we're seeking for new opportunities. It could be jobs, it could be new courses, etc. I club them all together as university opportunities, right? And you are actively there on that feed. When I say active, it does not mean that you have to like, comment, etc. Just the very act of consuming content, scrolling through profusely on a daily, weekly, monthly basis is good enough to deliver value for you. So this is what a feed consumer, I hypothesize, would like to consume. Now, when it comes to being a user who's creating content, my goal could be very different. And it could be to say, hey, as a content creator, I would like to get my content in front of others who find value so that I could establish myself as a subject matter expert. The feedback from the community is what allows me to build my brand value. It is not to say this could be my only job to be done, but I'm just putting out an example of what could be an interesting jobs to be done for the content creator who's a user. Likewise, for a business which is creating content, it could be to say that, hey, as a brand, I would like to get my content in front of my users and customers so that I can build awareness, engagement, and recall. For example, let's say there is a B2B SaaS company, which is in the analytics field, and they create content so they can either actively educate people who are using their product, or it could be to reach out to people who may find value and say, hey, if you're looking for any kind of analytical solutions in terms of building your products, we are the right people. And here's how I'm going to demonstrate my technical knowledge, right? Likewise, contents created in groups could also want to reach out to other community members who have not come back to the platform or attract new community members, right? For example, let's say there's the product force, or let's say there's Upraised. You want to demonstrate that you are the go-to community when it comes to certain subject matter expertise. And there's a lot of active discussions that your peer groups are making, and you want to probably promote and put some of that content onto the newsfeed, either to re-engage back with your community, or to attract newer members to say, hey, come and join this community because I think there's value for you in terms of how we think about product management. I'm going to take a pause here and see if there's any questions that have come about. Yes, you could have acquisitions for business as a jobs to be done as well. So like I said, this is not the most comprehensive, detailed jobs to be done, but it's largely to put yourself into the shoes of these individuals or these entities or groups who are creating content and asking yourself, why am I motivated to create content? What am I trying to achieve? And therefore, what are the goals and non-goals that I have, right? So from that lens, you want to spend time trying to articulate as many jobs to be done as possible, right? Now comes the question of who are the potential other stakeholders. Now, one clear stakeholder at least is the platform in itself. Why does LinkedIn find value? Now, for LinkedIn, the value comes in helping deliver productivity and success to its network members. And by virtue of that value being delivered, you expect the engagement to go up. You expect people to keep coming to the platform so that they are retained more effectively. And because they are retained more effectively, I can probably push down monetizable solutions. For example, ads could be pushed down to them. Or if, let's say, I'm a sales professional, I could push down and say, hey, here are reasons why you should use Sales Navigator to reach out to more clients. Or you could have recruitment as your primary goal. And it can help brands and businesses say, if you're looking out for talent, here are talent solutions that can be used because I have, let's say, 600 million, 700 million people who keep coming back to my platform every single day. And they're tuned to the following content. And your job fits into this thesis. And therefore, it makes sense for you to promote your jobs. So LinkedIn is therefore actively creating these platforms for engagement and retention so that they could monetize. Could there be other stakeholders as well? The answer is yes. So, but it's important for you to sit and think about what those are. Now, again, try to reverse engineer back from the behaviors that the product is emanating rather than trying to go down the traditional route, only and only because you want to be a slightly more concrete in your deconstruction at this point of time. Cool. I'm just going to take a pause and try to see what are the questions coming in. What if consider persona or user group is not the major active user base of the platform? The way you usually interpret this is by looking for a reasonable period on the kind of content creators or activity that's happening on the newsfeed in itself, right? If you theorize a persona, but you don't see that behavior manifesting in your feed, then you can most certainly be sure that that's not the most important persona that they care about, right? So, which is why I say reverse engineer from the product rather than trying to theorize on the end possible personas that could be. It's easier to look at how the product is designed for use and then try to ask who are the active participants and what are the various bifurcations emerging from that. A lot more easier than that. Now, I think some of you asked the question, what is the atomic unit of a product? Now, almost every product has an atomic unit. It's the fundamental building block which makes the experience come to life, right? To give you some concrete examples, the atomic unit of Uber is a ride. The atomic unit of Spotify is a song. And the atomic unit of Twitter is a tweet. I can go on with more examples. The atomic unit of Airbnb is a room or a house. The atomic unit of Google search is a search query in itself. Therefore, I'd like to ask you folks, what is the atomic unit of a LinkedIn feed? I'm going to take 15 seconds to get feedback from the audience. Awesome. I think most of you have hit the nail on the head. It is a post. Fantastic. Now comes the more interesting pieces, right? Now that you know that the post is the atomic unit, the question is, what are the various types of posts out there? Because helping you understand this will help you reverse engineer how to deconstruct this product. So again, the way you go about this deconstruction is not looking at the product on a single day. You need to observe the product in multiple scenarios or multiple days to be able to abstract and identify all the various types of posts, because these are all the kind of use cases that the feed is helping to solve for. For example, you see an abstraction at the medium level to say there are text-based posts, there are poll-based posts, there are video-based posts, there are image-based posts, there are link-based posts. Then there are also posts which are dedicated to certain deeper use cases, which is say, how do I make a job visible, right? Likewise, there are posts which necessitate slightly more deeper relationship building. For example, I have a job update post. This is not to say this is the entire universe of posts, but this is just to get a sample of what kind of posts are out there. And the methodology that you use to do this is not to look at a product on a single day. You're not going to find out enough patterns. You need to invest maybe a couple of days, couple of weeks to keep a snapshot of every single permutation combination of posts and then try to classify it. What is each post trying to do? For example, if you want to, let's say, deconstruct, say, something as simple as even, say, a Zomato notification, because I see that as probably one of the most common product teardowns. It's not enough to say, hey, there are notifications. You need to go one level deeper and say, what kind of abstractions are coming out, right? Is this a generic mass notification, or is there some degree of personalization, wherein you can say that my name is attached to it? If there is personalization, what kind of personalization? Is it just my name, or are there certain dishes which I like, which is being added to it? You can also then question, is there any variations in the medium? For example, is it purely a text-based notification, or is it an image-based notification, or is it a video-based notification? So you need to start going into that level of nuancing so that you can understand, why do these kind of posts exist? Why did someone think about this? Otherwise, it could have been a simple text post. It could have done the job. But at some point, someone realized that that format is not effective enough to solve for all the needs of the users. Therein comes the need for us to think about various formats of notifications or various types of posts, various design formats into how to deliver that value itself, right? Once we do that, we need to take a step back and ask ourselves again this question. Now, on one side, there is this set of posts, right? You see text posts, you see job posts, you see ads, you see videos, and somehow, magically, it comes together in this single linear structure. At this point, we need to ask ourselves this question: how is this happening? What is this black magic that converts posts? Because someone like, say, Deepak is sitting and writing a post. There is this, say, Vikas, who's a journalist who's sitting and talking about, say, PUBG. There is this group about India, talk about how Pragnananda World, participate in the chess competition. Then there is probably this company in Dubai which is trying to randomly promote an ad towards me. How is all of this coming to my newsfeed? What's the magic behind it? So this is where I say you need to take a step back and see if you can conceptualize what is called as a system diagram. What are various entities coming together to make this magic happen? And so we need to ask ourselves, okay, if there is something called as a post, should there not be some mechanism which allows me to create a post? Like, how does a post get created? It's not magically. There must be some interface, some system, some design which allows for anyone to enter text, image, videos so that a final piece of content can be created. Now, that piece of content somehow has to go into some black magic system which determines who should get Deepak's content, how often should they get it, and you probably at the receiving end, what decides whether Deepak's content should be shown, or say Vikas's content should be shown, or say an ad should be shown, right? So if you were to break it down at these three levels of abstraction, you probably get this very interesting high-level system which says, hey, there is this step called as post creation, wherein there are multiple users who are trying to create posts. Likewise, there's something called a job post. There are probably therefore entities trying to create this job post. Then there is someone who's trying to create post with a link. There's someone who's trying to create a job post. All of that suddenly flows into this magical black box, which then mixes, matches, and finally creates everyone's personalized newsfeed. Now, this is where we need to go to the next level of detailing, right? At this point, there are a set of interesting decisions that we need to make. We ask, how does each of this system work? What are the rules governing it? How does it work? And this is where your deconstruction becomes a lot more detailed and nuanced. You don't just stop at saying, hey, there's posts, there is a newsfeed, put together, magic happens. The value comes in asking the next level question. How do you create a post? What goes into creating a newsfeed personalization? What kind of questions should I ask? What goes into finally crafting the newsfeed experience, right? There's a question here. Which mind map tool is this? There's no fancy mind map tool. This is just plain vanilla MacBook's keynote. You can use anything for mind mapping. Don't get caught in the fanciness of any tool. Use the tool which you're most comfortable to create diagrams. That's how I would like to answer that question. Now, before we go deeper, right? I'm going to ask you folks, what kind of questions do you think we should be asking at this point of time? I'm going to probably take about 30 seconds. Let's, for example, take the very act of post creation, right? So let's probably 10 seconds for post creation, 10 seconds for newsfeed personalization, 10 seconds for newsfeed experience. What kind of questions do we have around post creation? Cool. So someone's asking, okay, which user group has to be prioritized? Great. What types of posts should have engagement? What's happening in the NFP or NF experience? Okay, newsfeed experience. How can I make someone click on it? Should there be a limit on characters? Beautiful. A lot of interesting questions coming. And this is how we need to go, right? And the goal is to try to be as exhaustive as possible, right? Do this with yourself, do it with friends, and you're very unlikely on day one to unlock all the questions, but over a period of time, the goal is to see how exhaustive you can get in this journey, right? So let me show you a stab at how I thought about this, right? So when it comes to, say, post creation, you can ask, okay, how do we create different types of post? What are the components of a post? What should be the UX that is designed? Now, when it comes to, say, newsfeed personalization, who is the user? What are their profile signals? What are the broad types of content being created? How do we know what is an engagement level to decide what should be shown and what should be not shown? What is the age of content, which will help us to decide, should I show old content or should I show new content? What should the content characters, like the keywords, tags, etc., how can we use that intelligence to do mapping better, right? Basis this, how should we define the sort logic? In this newsfeed personalization, what should be the various types of content? For example, how much should come from my first degree connection? How much should come from my second degree connection? How much should come from my third degree connection? How much should I give as real estate for advertisements? Now you go further down into newsfeed experience. What should be the UX for each post? How quickly should the content appear? What happens when there is no network? What are the various services that this newsfeed experience should interact with to make that final piece of content possible? So there's a question from Rupa saying, isn't newsfeed prioritized by the people you follow only? Not necessarily, right? Because sometimes you'd want to bring in also freshness and diversity, right? Otherwise, you're going to get polarizing content only from people that you follow. Sometimes there could be people who are in third or fourth degree network, or that could be advertisers who are out of network who also want to put in content. So again, these are important product philosophies that someone building the newsfeed team should ask. Should I only prioritize my first and second degree connection? Or should I also start considering third and fourth degree connection? So as you can see, there are a ton of product decisions. This is where it boils back to that question or the framework we asked, right? In order to build good product sense and have great product sense, therefore, ultimately it boils down to making really good product decisions that start by asking these questions, right? Now, let's go one level deeper in to say, let's pick one particular component, it's just the newsfeed experience, and ask ourselves, what are the product decisions that can be made for crafting a newsfeed experience? Again, opening the floor to the audience, 15 seconds. What kind of questions do you think you should ask here? All right. Someone says interests. How do we know what the user is in it? Design of the post, size and real estate of a post, relevant context. So we're only talking about newsfeed experience, which is the post design in itself, right? Just this particular component. What do you think are the thought processes or questions people ask just to come up with this particular design? Where you can see, there's a photo, there's a name, there's a title of sorts, there's a post, there are some, feedback loops, there are some comments, then there are some reposts, etc. There's a bunch of things that have come together to create this, right? What kind of questions? So you're seeing that, yes, options like comments, etc., real estate, dimension, size. So cool. These are some very interesting questions, right? So if you were to dive one level deeper, right? This is not even an exhaustive question, but just by looking at this real estate, here are the questions that you ask, right? First and foremost, like what information should be shown to establish the identity of the user and the relationship with the user who's consuming that content? Why was this necessary? Like, for example, if there was just a post, what would happen, right? Why, if there was no name, title, photo, would that make a difference? Like, for example, when you look at typical media articles, right? The emphasis is not put on the author, but more on the content. So content takes a precedence. Content is what comes on top. If you look at, say, newspaper, the person's name or the journalist's name is probably like a footnote at the bottom. But here the role has been reversed. You can see the person's name on top, and then you can see the content that we've been talking about. Then there are design elements, right? Like, okay, when you show someone's name, how big should it be? What should be its font weight? What are the factors that govern it? For example, if this were to be shown on a mobile screen, how would it factor in? And if there are, let's say, mobile screens of varying dimensions, etc., how does that affect my choice, right? Now, let's assume you have cross-platform choices. You are available on desktop, you're available on a mobile screen, you're available on, say, an iPad, you have different dimensions. How does that choice then influence how you make these choices, right? Likewise, how much space or character should I give for the content? For example, why is it that I can only see 2 lines of content? Why not 3? Why not 4? Why not 10 lines? Why is it that it's only limited to 2? What are the choices that govern it? Likewise, if there are comments being shown and someone has to click on comments, how many comments should I prefetch and store? How does it affect my caching, right? How does it affect my newsfeed's performance? So as you can see, right, there are, for every element that you pick, there are a ton of choices that are being made. And it's in these choices that go from being an average mediocre product to actually making a meaningful product that people really love and enjoy using, right? And as you start then comparing with maybe other products which are similar in nature and see that, you know what, structurally it looks the same, but it's not as exciting to use, it's not as delightful to use, it's not as engaging to use, you'll start seeing the contrast between a good and a great product. And this is just the newsfeed experience. So now let's ask ourselves the question, how many decisions did we have to make thus far? If someone was keeping a tab on the number of questions that we were asking, how many questions do you think we have asked thus far? Take a wild guess. 10, 25, 17, 15, or 50. Yeah, some of you are hitting the right ballpark. Someone is actually very close. Hopefully you've been counting. We've answered or we've been asked 56 questions thus far, and we have not even scratched the surface. We still have 7 more post types to cover. We at least are only aware of 2 more systems that are interacting with each other that we have at least attempted to deconstruct before trying to even understand the full complexity that has come together to make something as magical as a newsfeed to happen, right? And yes, this is by no means exhaustive even in the first place. So imagine, just with the top of my head, recall that I'm trying to put a bunch of questions. Then how much detailing and thought process must have gone behind every single product choice that a team at LinkedIn must have thought out to make a product as incredibly amazing. And it's not to say I still have my own qualms as to why it's still having certain broken experience, but this is the amount of detailing that goes into building great products. Now, just to show you how you can take a step back and see larger complexities, right? I'm going to show you what a larger system diagram could look like. What you saw in version 1 was just the case of a single post creation mechanism. It got to a black box called as personalization, which then went into the newsfeed experience. But if you take a step back and look at all the other systems that it interacts with, right? For example, when a post is created, how do you ensure that the post does not violate any trust and safety norms? For example, what if a user creates harmful post or hateful post? how do you moderate and manage that? What if people put in content which is not ideal, right? What if people put in, I don't know, things which are not safe for work, right? Is there a system that can govern and protect the audience then, right? So there has to be something like a content quality check mechanism, right? Now, the same content is being used in multiple systems. It's going into search, it's going into profiles, it is. So therefore, the same post exists in multiple states. And every time a user interacts, the state changes. For example, when you make a comment, the state changes, right? If someone gives a feedback saying that's a thumbs up, the state changes. And if, let's say, as a user, people see different states. For example, if I go to a news feed, I see a particular post has only 5 comments. But if I go to, let's say, search, I see 15 comments. If I go to that person's profile, I probably see only 2 posts. Is that a good experience? Which means there has to be some kind of a central state management system which brings all of this together. Say at any given incident time, the same content is what is going to be visible. And that's what I'm going to push into my personalization engine. That's what I'm going to be pushing into my profile engine. That's what I'm going to be pushing into my search index. Now, there's also that nuance where once I have engaged with the newsfeed experience, I would probably want to bring this audience back because I've either dropped off the app or I've gone into, let's say, different flows in the app. And I think there's a meaningful piece of communication that has come to me. And therefore, you would want to leverage, say, in-app notifications, emails, SMS. And then there's this entire concept of a profile. Should it be managed by the newsfeed team? Or should I leverage the profile service where somebody else is sitting and defining this is what a user profile is? And I'm going to make calls to say, bring in the user's name, bring in the user's profile picture, bring in the user's headline, bring in the user's follower count, etc. So as you can see, there are multiple other services that then start orchestrating and coming together to create that final product. So many times when you build products, you will not be building products in isolation. You will be leveraging other external services, or you'll be leveraging other products built by teams, and you then try to connect them to create the final value. And that's what becomes supremely important as well when you're trying to deconstruct. Are you able to truly go many, many layers deeper, trying to understand what are the various systems that come together to create this magic that finally you see as a singular newsfeed? Now, it's not like you're going to be able to come up with such a nuanced view of products on day one, right? If you had probably asked this to me 10 years ago, I don't think I'd have got to figure this out. But through practice and discussions over a period of time, you start having the ability to piece together and reverse engineer what the system then looks like. Now, this gets only more interesting if you start going into certain scenarios. Now, for example, in all of this complexity, imagine what happens when a user updates or deletes a post. A question then comes is, how quickly should this change propagate to a feed, right? Should it happen instantaneously? Should it happen after a few seconds? And therefore, what are the technical complexities of such a system, right? Because imagine for a platform that has 600 million users, a user is making a push and that content is now suddenly being pushed out to a few thousand users. And when a delete action is being made, how quickly should that change propagate? And therefore, what kind of technical infrastructure should power it? Or for example, if someone changes their profile headlines and for some reason my status has changed, when my newsfeed loads, should I bring in a cached version of it or should I bring in the latest version? What is the trade-off? What is the incremental value? Is it going to be detrimental to have, let's say, a slightly stale profile but fresh content? Or should I really have the latest piece of information about them as I get into it? It's an interesting trade-off. Someone could have an ideology that, no, everyone should know what the user's real status is at this point of time. Someone can say, no, at this point of time, there's already an established relationship. So even if I update the user's profile, maybe in the next session, it's okay. But the content freshness is what matters. And therefore, it's okay to make this trade-off, right? Hence, each of this is a choice. And that's where the art of execution, the art of looking at other products, and it is asking these questions to see patterns will allow you to understand how do products make these choices. And the way you do this is also for you to brute force and test this. For example, when you change your profile on LinkedIn after making a post, you need to then see on my newsfeed, how quickly does it change? Does it change instantaneously or does it change after 1 or 2 sessions, right? If you see it changing immediately, then you need to ask this question, okay, why did this matter? Maybe it does matter on LinkedIn or it does master on social platforms that people really want to know the latest status. And that probably has value in terms of real-time engagement. For example, if let's say I was in company X and I move on to a slightly more prominent company such as Facebook, suddenly my status as a content poster changes, right? Let's say I was working for a startup and then suddenly I went to Google. My authority value changes, right? Because now I'm at Google. The Google signaling value is probably 10x and adds value to my post. And therefore, it becomes important to communicate the real-time changes of status of who this individual is. Maybe at some other point, it really did not matter. So again, now, as you can see, how we think about this, you have to start getting into the nitty-gritties. And again, it only happens by you using the product. Like you have to test it, pressure test it to see if I did this, how did the product respond? If I did not do this, how did the product respond? So mere observation alone will not help. Actually have to pressure test it to tie that loop back to see why were certain choices made. And until you do that, you will never be able to appreciate why certain choices were made in building a great product. Then you can compare and contrast with a terrible product and say, you know what, this is what a terrible product looks like. You know what, I made this change and I don't even know why this change is not happening, because I think it's really important to know why this change happened, but this person did not care. That's how you start comparing and contrasting, right? Now, the last leg of this is ultimately to also map what I call as the customer journey, so that you put yourself in the shoes of the customers to say, okay, one is a system level view, and then there's it overlapping the user journey to say, hey, am I ensuring that the jobs to be done is well taken care of, and I'm able to cover all the happy flows and unhappy flows, right? So from that lens, here's a very high level view, right? When you think of a customer, there could be new users, that could be active users, that could be reactivated. An active user can open the app and they can choose to engage with a newsfeed, or they choose not to engage, right? If they engage with a newsfeed, they could continue to either close the app at some point of time or switch to another alternate use case. Or they don't even engage with the newsfeed. At this point of time, as a PM, you may want to ask yourself, hey, you know what? I think at a network level or at a platform level, my piece of information is way more valuable than the user not being on a platform or the other activity the user is active, which I think has a lower score. Therefore, I'd like to re-engage and bring them back into the equation. So when you start taking the system level view or this journey level view, you'll be able to identify, are you able to get the user to experience value often and repeatedly? And then you can start asking some very interesting questions. For example, if it's a new user and they open the app, what is the experience looking like? I'm not following anyone. I don't have any connections. So what should then be the precursor set of activities that I need to do? Or if, let's say, I'm a reactivated user coming in, let's say, after 6 months, what can then be the most interesting piece of content I can put out to this user, right? Or even it's an active user and I've run out of content. What should the newsfeed then do? Or I'm midway through a journey and let's say there's an interesting message that comes in and I start going into my messaging world. And then I drop out from that flow. But then you realize the user was in a previous state where they was actively engaging with a piece of conversation. How do I bring them back into the conversation? So when you try to think about it from the customer journey point of view as well, you'll be able to think of the right sort of questions to ask. So a journey view, along with a system view, both in conjunction allows you to empathize with the user, ask the right set of questions. And again, never on day one are you going to land up building these kind of nuanced views. Practice gets you there, right? So we covered all of these aspects during the course of this conversation. I've only left out how to do competition because you're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to pick up another product and ask the same set of questions. And what you're going to do is compare and contrast. And because I felt it was going to be a repetition of the exercise, I've left this out. But almost often when I talk about competition, it's just not immediate competition. For example, if I'm working at Myntra, I'm only not going to be looking at Ajio. I'm trying to also look at adjacencies. For example, Instagram is competition to me because at some level, fashion discovery is happening there. YouTube is competition for me because at some level, fashion discovery is happening there. So I want to understand what nuances are going on there. And maybe there are interesting learnings that come out from those people. And while they can't solve for commerce well, and I've probably, let's say, cracked content, I could say I could build a better content to commerce experience at the end of the day. So it's important to look at the universe of non-obvious competition. For example, I think a very famous statement from Netflix CEO is, my immediate competition is not a Hotstar or it's not a Disney. My competition is sleep. My competition is you going out and having fun at a restaurant. My competition is you sleeping, right? So everything that takes away you from my engagement is my competition, right? So when you do that kind of abstraction, it then becomes very interesting to redefine competition. And that's how a lot of companies become very innovative in how they identify problem spaces, right? Now, moving on. The last piece of any good deconstruction is to identify how do you measure success, both from a user lens as well as a business lens. Now, because I've been doing a slightly long, monotonous conversation for a short period, I'm going to now open up the floor again to ask you the question. What do you think are interesting metrics we could ask? Like, what kind of metrics would we want to measure? So I'm going to take a pause for 30 seconds, grab a drink, and for you to also use the comment section to put in what you think are interesting metrics. Again, I'm not going to critique any of these at this point of time because it takes a lot of time. Even some of the metrics I may put could be absolute bullshit. And I'm calling it out only because it requires a lot of discussions back and forth to finally crystallize on a good metric. Cool. See some interesting metrics: session time, engagement, likes, time spent, how much time is user spending on the feed, etc. Fab. A lot of you are hitting it right on the ballpark, right? So some of the metrics that at least I could think of top of the mind when I thought about this particular product is, what is the feed dwell time? Like, how much time do people particularly spend on the feed? And there's a reason as to why I was thinking about this metric as well. If you typically, I'm getting this point of view because I actively create content. And if you look at the amount of impressions and engagement it has from views point of view, so the number of people who actually click, share, reshare, etc., it's a very small percentage. But there's a lot of people who actually spend time reading content very passively without necessarily expressing their likes or dislikes. So I felt that feed dwell time could be an interesting metric to look at. And this discussion that I'm doing with you right now is probably the most important piece, right? Where there is no right or wrong answer, but it's important as a team at some point to debate about the merit of each of these metrics and identify why certain metrics will fail, under what conditions can it fail, and therefore why is it the most foolproof method of identifying it. And more often than not, you'll never get this metric right on day one, right? So at least what you would like to do is spend time trying to articulate these metrics and then try to draw parallels to how you build your products and put out your metrics framing skill set to test in your organization. And that's where you actually do the pressure cooker testing, right? When you do a deconstruct, at best, you could probably come up with good theoretical metrics, but your ability to actually frame good metrics actually comes when you build a product, put it out there, and see whether it actually works, and then use it back in your deconstruct. Say, you know what? When I've thought about metrics in this particular format, here are 10 reasons why it failed. So I think when I looked at this deconstruct, this is 2 or 3 good metrics. And if possible, try to connect back with PMs in those organizations or look at white papers written by these companies to see if they ever articulate those metrics as well. If yes, then more often than not, you can say that you're getting better at the art of identifying metrics from an external lens of view. Someone's asking the question, how is dwell time measured? You could either measure it in terms of, let's say, seconds and minutes, or depth of scroll, or post-consume. You could use all 3 of these metrics or any one of this, and then you can pressure test to see which of this actually really works. I'll then come to business metrics, right? For example, in this case, ultimately, if you recall, one of the hypotheses that we had was ultimately LinkedIn wants to increase platform engagement and retention, right? Which means I'm able to get more of my users to come back to my platform daily to consume my new feed. Why is that beneficial? If I come back more often, I can either push ads down you, or if you're a talent recruiter, I can nudge reasons as to why N number of people are searching for jobs and therefore look into talent solutions. Or I could say, you know what, X number of people are following you, responding comments, and therefore if you subscribe to a premium program, you stand to gain a lot more benefits, right? So ultimately, your DAO by MAU really helps in measuring short-term engagement. D7 is another interesting metric where you say, of the people who came and engaged with me on my news feed, how many of them came back in the next 7 days? Now, this is really a powerful metric to understand. Does your product deliver value in a short interval of time? If, let's say, people used your product and they never came back in the next 7 days, you know something is broken. It could be that the feed is not relevant. It could be a feed infrastructure itself is broken. For example, the feed is relevant, but maybe the user is coming in from a geography or from a device or from a network where the systems aren't able to deliver that news feed efficiently. And therefore, it's a broken experience. And therefore, they don't come back. There's no one right answer. You usually start off by hypothesizing the many reasons why people don't want to come back. It could be value. It could be value delivery. It could be people just don't understand why is this feed even shown to me, or who is this user, right? Eventually, you will be able to identify what went wrong. You connect, you course correct, and you tweak your product so that ultimately your D7 retention goes up. If your D7 retention goes up, at least you know that, okay, on the short term value is being delivered, but are people coming back in the next 30 days and consuming product? That still remains to be answered, which means the network value. Are people in your network creating good content over a longer period of time? So one is a very short-term measure. The other is a very long-term measure, right? The ad RPU is interesting because ultimately in your newsfeed as well, you have ads being stored. So you want to see that, hey, how much ads am I showing? And for the ads that I'm showing, am I able to generate meaningful revenue? And therefore, am I having the fine balance of engagement and ad-driven revenues? Again, like I said, these are very early thoughts. It is not to say these are absolutely the right metrics, but these are just thought starters for you to think about. And most importantly, when you do this exercise, discuss, debate with friends to figure out, hey, is this even the right metric? What could be reasons why this metric is absolutely wrong or BS for us at this point of time, right? Lastly, I'm going to wrap it up with a couple of methods in terms of how you can build your, what I call as a deconstruction knowledge repository, right? First and foremost, it becomes important to know what kind of products you deconstruct. Like I said earlier on, deconstruct products not just in the same industry, but also in different industries. Deconstruct both products with great ratings and review as well as terrible ratings and reviews. You cannot appreciate good if you don't know what is really, really bad, right? Likewise, do not only get caught up with looking at very large companies. There are some very, very smart early stage startups which are cracking user experience, and you may want to look at those as well. So it becomes important that as someone building products that you have a wide view of the world to know what's happening in your industry, outside of your industry, within the industry, who are the players emerging in, who are the incumbents, what are people who are doing a great job and what are people doing a shitty job as well, right? And then you need to obviously prioritize and pick and choose which of these products you'd like to do. But you need to, over a period of time, deconstruct products across the spectrum to build good appreciation and insights. The second part of it is hyper important for you to, document your deconstructions. What you don't write, you won't remember. And what you don't write, you cannot also recall at the end of the day. Because ultimately, you want to go back and build what I call as patterns, right? If you can't build patterns, all of this exercise is just going to waste. Because you then have knowledge in isolation, but you're not able to piece together how two and two fit together, right? You then want to compare and say, okay, why did LinkedIn make this choice? Why did Uber make this? Is there any commonalities here? Is there any good practice that I can take away from both these companies? Or I'm seeing as insights that I can leverage when I build a good product, right? Someone is asking, how do you record to recall? Essentially, all these questions that you ask, you sit and write. That's what I call as a system of record. You write down your thoughts, you write down your observations, you put down screenshots, you say, okay, I did this and here's how I saw the response. Unless you build that very detailed journaling system, you're not going to see patterns, right? So I'm going to show the finishing line, which will help you probably articulate and understand what a powerful system of record looks like. And it's something very familiar already to you. And ultimately, right, when you do your deconstruction, you do it in isolation, it's just a single person's point of view. What you need to do is also discuss it with your designers, your engineers, your other product managers, and most importantly, ask what you don't know. At some point, you're going to hit a plateau in terms of, I just don't know how to answer this question. For example, how does LinkedIn decide to assemble feed for 600 million users in under 100 milliseconds? At some point, you may not have all the technical insights for it. At some point, you would then want to go to your engineer and ask, hey, I know we're not in this field, but as an engineer, how do you think this problem is solved? And what kind of technical infrastructure is used to build it? Over a period of time, you will start building detailed knowledge. Your designer is going to start giving those insights. Your engineers are going to start giving those insights. And tomorrow, when you have to probably make a hard trade-off in terms of choices in building your products, you will be conversant with your engineer to say, when he says, hey, I'm going to use, let's say, Kafka to solve this, and here's how it's going to be used, and it's going to take me 6 months to build it, and here's its trade-off. You're not going to be like, whoa, I just heard 3 random jargons being thrown at me. You know why the choice is being made. You are able to appreciate the choice of that infrastructure that is being used. You know what it can and cannot do. While you may not be able to appreciate the architecture, it's okay. But at least you know why your engineers are making those choices. And you can either choose to agree or disagree and at least have a healthy debate with them. So from that lens, it helps you to know what you don't know and at least engage in meaningful conversations with your counterparts, either inside your organizations or outside, and at least go and learn these things, right? And lastly, like I said, once you build out a very detailed deconstruction journal, you will be able to start seeking patterns. And over a period of time, you may not even have to journal. You will be able to look at a product and build out those very complex maps within your head and getting down to the real questions that matter and say, I don't know this. And this is what I choose to focus on. And here's what I want to go and find answers for, right? And the finishing signs of you building a deconstruction masterpiece, you'll be able to reverse engineer a PRD. When you look at a product and if you're able to write a really, really good PRD just by looking and using that product, and if you're to give it to the PM who's built it, and they're able to say, wow, this is 80% on spot in terms of how you thought about the product, you know that you're nailing the art of deconstruction. So this is how I see deconstruction, right? So ultimately, I have always taken the effort to write down such instructions, and I've gone back and tested my PRDs with people. And the easiest way to do it is if you're inside an organization, look at any product within your own organization and deconstruct it. And go back to the PM who has built it successfully and say, hey, here's how I thought about it. If you were to read this PRD, is this how you would have thought about it? Either the PM should come back and say, you know what, you thought about this in greater detail than I could have, but you're hitting nail on the head in terms of 80%. You know that you've really, really learned the art of asking the right questions. So that's how I'd like to wrap up the art and science of deconstruction. And finally, to summarize, why do I think power of deconstructions is super powerful? As you can see, it helps you go down to supreme details. So it really sharpens your first principles thinking. Because you're getting into the details, you inherently start thinking details first, but you're also making choices in terms of which details matter. And because you don't have to build a product out to learn, it's a very, very fast-paced, cost-effective way of learning. And you're able to build patterns super fast across empathy, on users, in terms of business choices, in terms of technology. And ultimately, you get to know what you don't know, right? And that's super important as product managers, because if you don't know what you don't know, when the moment comes to make hard choices, you really aren't prepared to answer them. So the art of building products is being prepared, right? You can't sit in real time and try to figure many things out. So you need to invest this, what I would call as a backlog of time and effort to build these patterns. And now, therefore, tying it back to Amazon's leadership principles, leaders are right a lot because they have over time built these patterns. They have learned to know which details matter. They have learned to know which details ignore. And they've done this fast enough to know what can finally consistently deliver impact to an organization and to the users. And that's how you deconstruct products.